right, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. Let a few other people take their seats. I'm Mary Mulcahy, and I'm one of the founders of Life Matters Media. And thank you all for coming. We're very happy to have Dr. Barry Jacobs and Dr. Julia Meyer here to discuss finding gratitude and positive meaning in family caregiving, a topic that I'm sure is near and dear to many people in this audience. So I want to start by getting the business work done, and then I'll hand it over for the fun stuff. This is our vision of Life Matters Media, and Randy's going to come up and she'll talk to you a little bit more about what we do. But I just wanted to start by thanking our sponsors. We couldn't have these programs without having the wonderful sponsors that we have, and they're available out at the reception afterwards with a wealth of information. So first off, I'd like to thank Genentech for their generous support of this program and many of our programs. They have been a tremendous support to us throughout our journey here. In addition, Unity Hospice, a new friend of ours, is here today, and they have generously supported this, and I'd like to invite them up to tell you a little bit about themselves.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Melinda. I work with Unity Hospice and Palliative Care. We'd like to thank Life Matters Media for inviting us to be part of this great event. Unity offers a variety of extra care services to the community of Chicago, all across northern Illinois, as well as northwest Indiana and St. Louis. And at Unity, finding gratitude and meaning in caregiving is a fundamental part of our care and something that our team does every single day with the families that we work with. Our team acts like a family, and we treat those under our care as family and consider family a part of the patient, all of which need support. Caring for a loved one has many rewards, but also can be challenging. So just know that you don't have to do it alone. Family caregiving for a loved one with a life-limiting illness can be overwhelming. It's kind of like boarding a train. You're unsure exactly where it's going or where it's going to get there, and it's full of uncertainty, perhaps even fear. The whole family can be on this train together, a mom, a dad, a sister, a brother, a grandma, and an aunt, and they travel on this train with each other and find that it can be a very bumpy ride. The train makes a stop, and our Unity Hospice or palliative team is able to come aboard. We're able to provide a nurse who can help make a patient comfortable and offer all the clinical support, a CNA for personal care, a social worker to help with outside resources, and a chaplain to keep everyone on board supported. Equipment, medications, supplies also come aboard to help this family with all of their needs. Our team's sole purpose is to make this a smoother ride. They all continue on this track together until the train makes one more stop, and at that point, just one person gets off. But that train keeps on going because there's still a family there that needs support. Another part of Unity's team is able to get on board, and that's our bereavement support, continuing to lock arms with this family and hold their hand during a very difficult process. Support services with that family go on as long as they'd like to stay aboard, and when they're ready, we're all able to get off together. Family caregiving is so important in helping your loved one, but we also realize that it's not easy. Please stop by our table afterwards to learn about how we can help you help the ones that you love. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank our other platinum sponsor, which is Brookdale Senior Living Solutions, and I believe Lynn Johnson is going to say a few words about Brookdale.
Brookdale is the largest senior living in the country with over 1,100 locations. And I have my two coworkers with me, Kevin Carnahan and Gail Gordon, because we have 16 locations within the Chicagoland area that have independent living, assisted living, we have skilled, and we also have memory care. So we have our own private duty, home care and home health, and we're just about to open our own hospice. So we do a lot of things, but the reason I'm really here is because I have a passion for people that are caregiving. I took care of a very sick mother for 15 years while having 3 kids and working. And by the time it was all over, and I didn't know about palliative, and I did not know about hospice. I thought that meant I was quitting, and I didn't know any of these things. And after my mother passed, I got into this industry because I want to help other people understand that there is help out there and there are resources out there. And when a hospital gives you a 3-page list of here are names that can help you and you can't figure out which one to even call us and we'll help. People in this industry will help you get to the right places. And that's why I'm so happy to be here as a sponsor tonight and with this great group of people, because it's wonderful to help others. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We'd also like to thank our gold sponsors, and no, not everybody's coming up to talk. But all these people are out in the lobby there, and I invite you to stop by their table and talk with them. We have the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center, the Northwestern Cognitive Neurology and Alzheimer's Center, the Alzheimer's Association of Illinois, and the Robert H. Lurie Cancer Center. And then in addition, we have our silver sponsors, Gilders Club, Lincoln Park Village, SASSY, Services for Adults Staying in Their Homes, and the American Heart Association. So you can find all these organizations out in the lobby, and I invite you to talk with them during the reception. So I also want to let you know that we are lucky that we have Dr. Jacobs and Mayer here. They've recently written this book, which is sponsored by AARP, Meditations for Caregivers. And we have that for sale in the lobby. So I have copies of it out there. Just come find me. And if you're interested, it's a wonderful book. It's got a lot of vignettes in it. It's really fantastic. I think we'll be hearing some about it tonight. So I have that for you outside. Hopefully you all picked up an evaluation form. If you didn't, I encourage you to get one on your way out. Please give us feedback about the program. We're always trying to improve these, find out what works and what doesn't work. And if you hand me an evaluation, you will get a raffle ticket, and you may win a prize at the end. So we use bribery, we'll use anything. Now, I'm going to ask you all to take out your phone and log into slido.com, slido.com. Sorry, I should have said this before. Log into this website. You should have internet in here without a problem. And then enter event 3656. So while you're doing that, I'm going to exit. This will only take a minute. I keep forgetting what he told me to do. Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay, so if you log into 3656, you should have these options. So what we want to know is why you're here. Are you here because you're a healthcare professional, a caregiver, a care receiver, a caregiver advocate, or a family friend of a person receiving care and you wanted more information? I didn't put other. You have to commit to something. Oh, other is in there. I thought I left other off. Somebody must have convinced me to keep it. Okay, so that's who's in the audience here. A lot of healthcare professionals, but lots of family and friends who are looking for more information. Great. Okay, now, type in for the next one. What word do you think of when you hear caregiving? It worked when I tested it. It made a word cloud. I'm going to keep working on this. It made a fantastic word cloud. Oh, there we go. It's all in there. Stress, love, exhaustion, it's all part of it. All right, wonderful. So with that, I'd like to invite Randy Bellasomo up, a co-founder in Life Matters Media, and she's going to introduce our speakers. So we'll leave that up for now.
Yeah, before I introduce the speakers, I want to say to those of you who are caregivers, and I think speakers would would agree with me, I hope, that I think personally it's the most important job you could ever do in your life. And I say this, and I know that some people associated with our organization believes this too. I could do whatever, accomplish whatever there is to be accomplished in this world. I could win a Pulitzer Prize, which I never will because I don't go to work much anymore. But even if I did, it wouldn't be as important to me or as meaningful as the opportunity that I have had to be a caregiver. So please know that if you are doing that, it's the most important thing you can ever do, and I hope you can derive some meaning from it. This program has been in the works for several years, actually, ever since we met Dr. Jacobs at a conference a few years ago, and he shared what he was doing and why he does it regarding caregiving, and we shared a little bit about what we were doing, and we've been looking for an opportunity to work together. And this Aging in America conference that's ongoing in Chicago is finally the opportunity for that. And shortly after our first meeting, he began to contribute to our website and sharing some of his great columns about caregiving. And he writes about issues that a lot of us are afraid to voice. And I think that's such a wonderful gift that he's provided readers, because when we started our organization, we knew that with a tough topic like ours, people are thinking about these issues and stressed about these issues at home, and they're afraid maybe to talk to their family members, they're afraid to talk to their doctors or their family members' doctors, and they're looking for a place where they can explore these issues, and his writings have provided a vehicle to do that with sensitivity and compassion and no taboo. So we're grateful for that. As many of you know, our organization works to help folks across this area consider, communicate, and document their end-of-life wishes. So, because we know that that's the best way to provide care that aligns with your own values, goals, and beliefs. And in the process of helping others start and continue these conversations, we help and educate a lot of caregivers, but we've never really had a program designed for caregiver issues. And so we're delighted to be doing that tonight. And we have received several emails and phone calls in the past week from caregivers who can't be here tonight because caregiving, as you know, is so consuming. And that's why we have this video, and we usually do when we have a bigger program, we have a video that will be available on our website, so you can share that link with caregivers who can't be here because they're providing care, and so maybe they can get something out of it too. So feel free to share that. So thank you for those who did make it tonight, and especially for those of you who had to make a sacrifice to get here. And to introduce our speakers, we welcome Dr. Barry Jacobs. He's a clinical psychologist, family therapist, caregiving spokesperson for the American Heart and Stroke Association, expert advisor to the AARP, and an author who joins his wife and caregiving partner, Dr. Julia Mayer, also a clinical psychologist in private practice in Pennsylvania, where she specializes in caregiving and relationship and family concerns, and I already emoted to her all my family issues. And she has, like Dr. Jacobs, held a variety of teaching positions at universities and is a widely published author. So please welcome the both of them to Chicago.
Thank you so much, Randy and Mary, and thank you, Life Matters Media, and all the sponsors. It's really our pleasure to be here in Chicago. So we're from Philly. I grew up in New York, and I will tell you, and I'm not just pandering here, Chicago is my favorite city. So come back here as often as I can. So we're going to, and the remote is, thank you. My wife always knows where things are when I lose them. So we're going to tell some stories about ourselves. We're going to tell some stories about what we've learned about family caregiving in the last 25 years. But maybe just for starters, we saw how many folks are healthcare professionals and how many folks are caregivers and how many folks are receiving care themselves. I will bet you a lot of those healthcare professionals, myself included, got into healthcare because of a family caregiving experience. And I'm also going to bet you that there are a lot of healthcare professionals that are now doing this work. Am I right? Okay. Anybody just want to say briefly kind of what they're dealing with? Very, very briefly. Somebody very brave. Okay. Very good. And talk, if you could stand up and talk really loud.
Hi, my name is Amy Bouchard. My husband has been diagnosed this past year with primary progressive aphasia and recently cancer.
Okay, and it sounds like you got your hands full. And if I may ask, what has this been like for you to be there for him?
It's wow. It's like a roller coaster. I mean, there's some days where obviously it's crazy, and I think the initial just dealing with doctors and insurance and getting everything lined up to get even the diagnosis was challenging. And but I'd probably say I feel like I'm handling a little bit better than some people that maybe I've met at other caregiver meetings. I work as a life coach and a speaker, and I use specific rituals. And when you're talking about meditation, that's one of them that I use, and it's powerful. It helps you walk through really challenging times in a much better frame of mind.
Good. So thank you for sharing that. And so I'm hearing two things. Number one, at the time that your loved one is diagnosed, and it sounds like your loved one was diagnosed with actually two different things, you have to kind of get the lay of the land. And there's a certain period of time where you have to learn not just about the disease and its treatments, but also about the systems of care that exist. Because we have a healthcare system and a social service system that are very complicated and very fragmented. And sometimes one hand doesn't talk to the other hand. It's very difficult for caregivers to pull this all together. So that's going to be one thing that we talk about tonight. The other thing I'm hearing is that you have found your own ways of coping, maybe things that you use in your work coaching for other people, which you've incorporated into your own life, and that's helping you get through this very difficult time in your life. So that's wonderful. Thank you. Maybe kind of one other personal story real fast, please. And you are?
My name is Cheryl, and this is Pete, and I am a caregiver for his father. He moved in with us 3 years ago, and we've seen the progression to where he's now at the end stage of frontal temporal dementia. So the challenges for me have been taking him through these stages, and now when he really needs the help, I'm starting to feel like a lot of anxiety, depression, and sometimes overwhelmed.
So thank you, Cheryl, and it sounds like you've been doing very good work on behalf of your father-in-law for a long time. And yes, the end stages of any dementia, frontal temporal lobe dementia, maybe in particular, is very hard. And as you know, family members who've made that commitment to caring for a loved one with dementia, it's very difficult for them to define when they get to a point where it's really more than they can handle, because dementia is a slow-moving disease, and you sign up to care for someone early on, not knowing what that commitment is going to entail over time. And so, you know, I imagine that you have conversations between one another, figuring out how to provide the care that you want to provide, and also kind of what are the limits of the care that you can provide. At what point do you consider other options? And those decisions are very difficult. And I think there are many people here in this room, folks from Rush, folks from Brookdale, who regularly have these conversations with caregivers in your situation. So with that by way of introduction, we're going to tell a little bit about our own personal stories. First off, just to kind of give you an overview of what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to just paint a picture of caregiving in this country. It's become a much more common phenomenon in the past 25 years. We're going to talk about what we call the strains and gains of caregiving, because caregiving has gotten a lot of negative press. There's been a kind of negative narrative about how it affects caregivers to be providing care to a loved one. And yet we know in our own lives, personal lives, and in our professional work, that many people derive a lot of gratification and meaning from the work that they're doing on behalf of loved ones. And we want to highlight that, because we think that those positive aspects of caregiving are very, very important and are actually the basis of the book that we've written. And then we'll just provide some of our own perspectives on what are some of the keys to caregiving for caregivers. So how does that sound?
Great.
Good, okay. So I want to start off with a photograph from 1942. This is a picture of my father when he graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, and he's dancing with my grandmother. And if you can see the expression on my grandmother's face, she's glowing, because my father, the oldest son in the family, was her favorite, the apple of her eye, and she was extremely possessive of him. And so much so that after my father graduated college and went off to World War II, when he came back from World War II in the Air Force, he then moved back into his parents' apartment in Queens, New York, and stayed for almost another 10 years, and having his mother really wait on him hand and foot. And here's a picture of my parents' wedding in 1957, and you don't quite see that much taffeta nowadays, but I think it's a wonderful picture of the two of them. Here's another picture with my mother on the right holding the bouquet, and my father in the white tuxedo in the left. And there's my grandmother in between them. Which is actually where she usually was in their marriage. And my mother and grandmother competed for my father's attention and affections throughout their marriage. And my mother and grandmother basically got along okay. Until, unfortunately, when my father was 51 years old, he was diagnosed with brain cancer. And at that point, my mother and grandmother, who had always been rivals, that rivalry really got heated up, and they really fought for control of my father's cancer treatment, fought for control over what doctors he was going to see and where he was going to be treated. And my grandmother read about an experimental treatment for brain cancer in California and wanted my mother to sell our family home in Queens and move the family out to California in order to give my father the very best chance of surviving. My mother, who had multiple family roles, as do we all, she was a wife, but she was also a mother, and she was a daughter to her own aging parents. She did not feel that she could sell the family home. And when she told my grandmother no, she would not do it. And my grandmother took that very hard, and basically from that point forward, they really didn't have much of a relationship. My father died about a year after he was first diagnosed, and my grandmother blamed my mother for his death. And that my mother and grandmother then did not have a conversation again for 17 years until the day of our wedding. That was the first time they had seen each other in almost 2 decades. So I share the story by way of saying, in many family caregiving situations, family members pull together and really help one another, and family bonds are strengthened. In my family growing up, unfortunately, it was a situation where the disagreements led to family schism, which compounded the suffering that due to the loss of my father from cancer. It was bad enough that my father was no longer around, but now my brother and I had a very strained relationship with my grandmother thereafter, because we would go to see her and she did nothing but badmouth our mother, which made it very uncomfortable. So in my work, I became a psychologist because of this. I became a psychologist specializing in family caregiving because of this. And my mission has been how to help families handle caregiving better than my own family did growing up. How to help folks pull together around these very difficult times in our lives. If you live long enough, you have more than one family caregiving situation. So my mother got remarried and had a wonderful next marriage to a man who she was married to for over 30 years. In the last almost 15 years of their lives, they were living in Florida, South Florida, in a gated golf community, living the good life, until my stepfather developed Alzheimer's dementia. And my mother, who was becoming more frail with age, was having a very difficult time caring for him. So in the year 2010, Julie and I moved the two of them up to live in an apartment about a mile from our home in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. And then we were really involved in caring for them on an almost daily basis, supporting my mother in her care of her husband. And my mother would go to the nursing home literally 3 times a week to spoon feed my stepfather lunch or dinner, as you can see here. Hard work, but she took a lot of pride in it and always left feeling more chipper, which was always amazing to me, because the nursing home was not the most wonderful environment, and caring for him didn't seem to be the happiest of activities, and yet she seemed to come away from it by feeling really uplifted by caring for him. And more recently, unfortunately, my mother has now declined herself and developed her own dementia, and she went into a nursing home about a year ago. And so we visit her now about once a week. I'll go visit her on Sunday. Very difficult to see her going downhill, but again, I mean, these are parts of life that many of us have encountered. So those are some of my family stories.
This is a picture of my parents and our daughter, who's now 24 and an engineer and living in Denver. But at this time, it's about, I guess, 20 years ago, my parents were pretty healthy. My dad had always had little bits of health problems, but nothing too terrible. But as time passed, he became ill from advancing diabetes. He'd had colon cancer. He then developed multi-infarct dementia and kidney disease. And so that's a picture of me and my mother. We would go with my sister every now and then for a respite trip for my mom, because she was my dad's caregiver, to Atlantic City for the weekend. And I have an older brother who would stay with my dad. And so that worked for a little bit. And then unfortunately, my mother had heart valve surgery, which was successful, but a few days later, she had a side effect from it that killed her. So we were all very shocked. This is a picture from her funeral. My dad, my 2 brothers, and me. I think my sister took the picture. So we were devastated by her loss, our loss of her. And then at the same time, we had a crisis in caregiving. We had to take care of my dad. And he lived in New York. I live in Pennsylvania. My sister's in New Jersey. I have a brother in San Diego next to my dad. And the one on the end lived in New York, 45 minutes away from my dad. And so the four of us really had to work hard to figure out how we were going to manage his caregiving. My older brother on the end there was his primary caregiver, and I would go every other weekend to New York when we had teenage kids, but I would drive back and forth and give him a break and spend the weekend with my dad. My sister did what she could. My brother in San Diego would fly in when he could, which was not that frequent. We would try to have group phone calls. And I just have to say, even though it was a very sad thing, at the end of the day, my siblings and I, even though there were times where we disagreed and we fought, and my brother in San Diego had advice for the rest of us because he knew better, but we worked through everything. And at this point, I think because of that, we're pretty close, maybe closer than we were even before my parents passed away.
So we share these stories just by way of example, because our stories are not unique. They really are very common, increasingly common in our country. There are over 40 million Americans nowadays who, in the course of any given year, are providing care to a loved one, an aging parent, a disabled spouse, a chronically ill child. And these are numbers that are growing, and they're growing because our population as a whole is aging, and as people get older, they're more prone to developing the kinds of illnesses for which they need care. And the numbers of caregivers are growing because people are living longer with the kinds of diseases that would have killed them years ago. So they live longer with cancer, and they live longer with heart disease, and they even live longer with dementia than they did 30 or 40 years ago. But they don't live longer, in many cases, whole and self-sufficient. They live longer with the kind of functional deficits for which they need care. And in our country today, that care is primarily coming from family members. And what we ask those family members to do is a whole host of tasks that most of us are unprepared for. So it's not just a matter of being the driver or taking our loved one back and forth to the doctor, or maybe being the attendant, kind of waiting on them, making sure that they get the pills, or that they get to bed on time. But we end up being the navigator of the healthcare system, and we end up being the person who gets information from the doctors and tries to interpret it and let the rest of the family know what's going on. Or we sometimes are the ambassador for the patient, trying to teach the doctors about who the patient is, what his or her particular needs are. Or that many times we function as case managers, because our healthcare system is so fragmented that one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing, and consequently, it's oftentimes family caregivers that are bringing the information from the cardiologist to the neurologist to the primary care doctor, taking the lab values from one office to the other and keeping people informed. So there's a lot of different things we're asking caregivers to do. Most caregivers in this country are women, but if I showed you this slide 10 years ago, the split between women and men was 70-30. So us men are beginning to step up a little bit. Because I'm a baby boomer, I thought it was just baby boomers doing this work, but in fact, about a quarter of the caregivers in this country are millennials, another quarter are Generation Xers. So this is really affecting people at very different ages. And that the average caregiver, if you boil down those 40 million to one person, it would be a 49-year-old woman who's been caring for her mother for at least 4 years and is also working part-time and is caring for children. So this is the classic sandwich generation caregiver, caring for someone in the generation above, caring for people in the generation below, being stretched and pressed in too many different ways. Specifically talking about Alzheimer's disease, and I know the folks from Northwestern Alzheimer's Disease Center are here. We know that there are over 5 million Americans that have Alzheimer's disease, and that this is a number that's expected to double or triple in the next 30 years. But that Alzheimer's patients, even though about half of all the nursing home beds in this country are occupied by a patient with dementia, most folks with Alzheimer's disease are still cared for at home. 70% of them are being cared for by family members at home. And that's, this is a statistic about Alzheimer's in particular that I always like to cite. Alzheimer's disease, on average, at the time that someone is diagnosed, people have a lifespan of another 7 to 8 years. But when you ask their family members how long they expect to have to provide care for their loved one from that point forward, the largest number of them will say 2 years. So what does that mean? It means that there's a discrepancy from the outset between how long people expect to have to provide care for and how long they're going to have to provide care. And that's the difference between people who think they're going to run a sprint and in fact it turns out they're running a marathon. And when people go at running a sprint, they expend all their energy, they go all out all the time. But if you've been doing this for 2 years and now 3 years and now 5 years, and you have not taken the steps to pace yourself or replenish yourself adequately, then what you're looking at is you're beginning to burn out with time. And that's where a lot of caregivers, in my experience, run into trouble. Caregiving with such a large group, we would expect that it's a very heterogeneous group. People have heterogeneous reactions to caregiving. So about half people will tell you that they are somewhat stressed by caregiving. About a third will tell you that they're highly stressed by caregiving. And then another, about 16% will tell you that they're not at all stressed. In fact, these are very often people who don't even identify themselves as caregivers. They identify themselves as devoted wives or dutiful daughters, and they see this as just part of what a family member does. So we have a very broad range of experiences with caregiving. And we have two very different researches about caregiving effects. So I'm first going to show you the negative effects. Up in the corner there is Rich Schultz. He's a social psychologist at the University of Pittsburgh, who in the late 1990s and early 2000s did a lot of fundamental work on the effects of family caregiving on dementia caregivers and found a cascade of effects: insomnia, depression, high rates of neck and back pain, literally from helping people up and down the stairs, in and out of bed, on and off the commode. And then unfortunately, because these caregivers were neglecting their own health care needs, because they were so focused on the care for their loved one, if they had their own diabetes and their own hypertension, they then did not fare well with those illnesses and died at a higher rate than same-age peers with the same illnesses. So a very famous Journal of the American Medical Association article in 1999 found that those dementia caregivers were dying at a rate of 63% higher than those same-age peers with the same illnesses. So when this came out, there was a big hue and cry in the public health community, and it was around this time that money through the Department of Aging was devoted to what's called the National Family Caregiver Support Program, and we have that today being disseminated through what we call the area agencies on aging throughout the nation. How many of you have seen the movie Still Alice? Many of you had. Wow, you guys are moviegoers. That's great. So kind of a depressing movie, I would say. It's about early onset dementia. It talks about how a family really struggles. Individuals in the families have to really shift roles. And the husband in this family really is unable to embrace the caregiving role. Instead, he decides at the end he's going to go off and pursue his career. And so who steps up and provides the bulk of the care? Well, it was the wayward daughter who was living in California who now comes home to take care of her mother, which I guess is a nice thing, and they're going to have a different relationship than they had. But I think this movie had a kind of very upsetting feeling to it about this is a very difficult, disruptive passage in the lives of families. However, there's been more recent research that has found that family caregiving has the potential for positive. So there's an epidemiologist at Johns Hopkins University by the name of David Roth, who has done a series of very large studies that in fact has found that caregivers don't die younger. In his research, he finds that caregivers live longer. And the way I understand this is when you have a million things to do and you can never get them all done, then you're just not allowed to die. You have to kind of keep living. And so these folks live longer. I like to think that they live longer because they have an enhanced sense of purpose. They wake up each day with feeling like my life really matters a lot. I've got to stay alive and I've got to take care of myself. According to a 2002 study, most caregivers are able to cite at least one positive aspect of caregiving. And then how many of you have seen this movie? Oh my Lord, people actually seen this. Most of the time I ask, no one has seen this. So, one of our favorite movies, 2007, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Laura Linney, two great actors. They play a brother and sister who have not seen their father in about 20 years because he had abandoned the family, and the father develops Alzheimer's disease, is being cared for by his girlfriend. The girlfriend dies. The girlfriend's family calls Philip and Laura and says, hey, we've got your dad here. He's demented. You got to take care of him. And they decide that even though they haven't seen their father in 20 years, they're going to try this. They bring him home. They spend the next couple of years taking care of him. He winds up in a nursing home. He eventually dies in a nursing home. But this being a Hollywood feel-good movie, at the end, they have grown so much from family caregiving. They feel like they're better, more competent people. They're able to make better commitments in their own personal lives, better commitments to their own relationships and their careers, and they have a much better relationship as brother and sister than they ever did. So this is a movie about how family caregiving has enormous positive growth potential. Anybody read the memoir Bettyville? Okay, we got one hand here. Terrific memoir written by a guy named George Hodgman, who is a book editor who had grown up in rural Missouri and was a gay man, left rural Missouri, feeling very alienated from the community, moved to New York City to become a book editor, and then when his father died and his mother had dementia, moved back to rural Missouri to take care of her, moved into her home. And at the beginning of the book, when he first starts caregiving, he says, all I could think of that night was what would become of my mother, that the time was coming. It was my turn to step up. I told myself that whatever happened, I would do this one thing right, better than I had ever tried to do anything. Because even though my life was different, I wanted a place in the tribe. I still do. This is a man alienated from his family, saw caregiving as a way to win his family's approval and find a way back into the tribe. And then after he's been doing this work for a couple of years, he says, I know this home is just for now, but I treasure our days. I feel different than when I arrived. Nothing magical or radical, just a little more comfortable with myself. In my head, there was a kind of early morning quiet because I have come through for her. It has taken me so long to feel okay in my own skin, but I feel better, more at home in the world most days. So here too, someone who's really felt like he grew personally and gained personally from the work he was doing with his mother. There was actually a Time magazine article about George Hodgman about 6 months ago. His mother died, and rather than moving back to New York, he decided to stay in rural Missouri because he really feels at home there now in a way he had never felt before because of the caregiving he did for her. This is up in the left there. This is David Kuhn, a very famous caregiver researcher who I think nicely summarizes some of the positive rewards of caregiving. He says the majority of caregivers readily endorse caregiving gains or positive aspects of caregiving, including having the opportunity to serve as a role model, having the chance to give back to care recipients, experiencing an enhanced sense of purpose, feeling appreciated, and helping to maintain the identity and well-being of the family. This idea of giving back to people who've taken good care of us, we find is a very important motivation for caregivers. It's one of the main reasons why they do this. And then this idea of the opportunity to serve as a role model. I have to say that when we moved my mother and stepfather up from Florida to live near us, and we had teenage children who, by the way, weren't so wild for this idea, because it really was changing their lives too, and they didn't really want their lives changed. But we were aware that we were basically demonstrating a value to them, and that is the value that family members care for one another, and that we hope by imparting that value to them, that when we got older, that they would step up and take care of us. So
Yeah, who knows?
we're only half joking by saying that. Okay.
We can hope.
Yeah. All right. So what we say is that caregiving brings strains and gains, and that really in our careers we focus a lot on this main question, and I think it's a question for all of us. How do we minimize caregiving strains and maximize the potential gains? We actually feel that if people can focus on those gains, then the strains aren't half as bad. So I'm going to turn this over to Julie now.
So here's a picture of our book, and the idea of the book is to support caregivers. It's short stories about caregivers, including ourselves, and then some psychological advice. There are some pages of meditative things that people can do to feel calmer and deal with their stress. And then there's a resource section at the back. You can look at it outside later if you like. So we want to give caregivers tools to make the most of the situation they're in, regardless of whether they chose it or whether it's sort of fallen on them. And so, keys to caregiving. It's important for caregivers to feel that they themselves are important, that they need to care for themselves. They have to accept whatever feelings they have, resentment, negative feelings of any kind, sometimes hatred of the care receiver after a bad day. It's just human. We try to help people accept their feelings. We talk about defining commitments realistically, utilizing whatever support there is, and finding positive meanings in the sacrifices that caregivers are making. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those things. Barry mentioned earlier a marathon metaphor that we like to share with caregivers. Caregiving is a marathon, not a sprint. And if you were running a marathon, you'd want to learn the route, the ups, the downs, the distances, where the water stations are. So when you're caregiving, you want to learn what your care receiver's illness or disease looks like, what will happen in the future, what are the likely things that you need to know. So you learn what you can in order to prepare for this marathon. We talk about maintaining a sustainable pace, so you can't take care of everything and feel like the perfect caregiver and sustain that. So our goal is to help caregivers figure out where they can get support and so that they can keep going. Take any and all replenishment. If you're running a marathon and you get to the 5-mile water station, you don't say, no thanks, I don't need that. You say, you just take the water. And caregivers need to do the same thing. When people offer help, support, a meal, a little respite, a babysitting situation so someone can go to the movies or to the supermarket, we try to get caregivers to say yes. Just say yes. It's hard, but that's what we try to get them to do. And run alongside others. So we try to help caregivers find support networks, whether it's their church, the support groups there, if there are, something through the hospital, online, whatever kind of support, neighbors, friends, extended family, whatever would be a positive, supportive person or group. It's so important to normalize ambivalence. I think any of us who've raised children know that sometimes it was infuriating to raise children, and so sometimes taking care of an adult who needs care can bring up those same feelings. It's normal. What we sometimes see with caregivers is that they feel so guilty about their negative feelings that they try to be perfect. And a lot of those caregivers control everything, and it can even make the caregiving situation difficult. It can strain the relationship between the caregiver and the care receiver. So we try to help people not feel guilty, just normalize whatever they're feeling. It is normal. So that's pretty much what I'm saying. And it's normal to hate some of the tasks of caregiving, and hopefully I'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's really something that we need to reflect on. Is this something I can keep doing, this particular task, or is it something I need to find a way to get some help with? So you have to give yourself permission to set limits. So one of the things that happens with commitment is, let's say the caregiver's husband has early Alzheimer's, and she might think, well, I can do this. I love him. I want to take care of him. I'm devoted to this. And then time goes by and it gets harder, and the tasks get more complicated, and the needs are greater, and we call that mission creep. So the mission is to do the best caregiving job you can, but it gets bigger and bigger and more complicated. And that's where we try to help caregivers to think about what resources they have. Who else can help them in their family? Who can help them in the neighborhood, in their church group? What resources are there? Who can they go to learn about community resources? Can they hire caregivers? Is there a way for them to afford that? And we just try to help people have control over what caregiving they're doing and where they set their limits, so that they can feel like things are not wildly out of control for them. And as I mentioned before, it's very hard to say yes when people offer support, and I know a lot of caregivers feel like I should be able to do this all by myself, and if I need help from someone, I'm obviously not doing a good enough job, and I'm failing. And that's certainly not true. And it shouldn't be shaming, it should be a way to let other people be helpful, because when you help someone else, you feel good. And so when other people offer you help as a caregiver, you give them an opportunity to feel good. There's no need for shame. And the more support that you accept, the more you are sustaining your caregiving over time. And one of the most important pieces that we try to help caregivers with is to find the positive meaning in what they're doing. Because if it just feels like a day-to-day burden, where they're stressed and strained every single day and they wake up with dread and they're just kind of putting one foot in front of the other, it leads to burnout, it's overwhelming, and it leads to depression. So we try to help people stop and reflect and remember what is meaningful about what they're doing. How does it make them feel? How will they feel looking back on their efforts years later? What does it mean to them to take care of this person who's been in their life? So we've had a case, this woman, we'll call her Karen, a 60-year-old widow who took care of her father with dementia, and it wasn't easy for her. And when we asked her, what does it mean to you to take care of him? She told a story about how when she was young and having children, she had a baby and she was married, and her husband was abusive. And she left him with the baby and moved home with her parents. And after a while, she and her husband started to work things out, and she was thinking about going back to him. And her father said to her, "If you end up coming home with 10 babies, you're welcome. You're always welcome in our home." And she went back to the husband and had a couple more kids, and they ended up, fortunately, getting divorced eventually. And but she always remembered her father's offer. And then when he was 82 in need of care, it meant so much for her to be there for him in the way that he had been there for her. It was something she was completely dedicated to. As a matter of fact, his care became more and more difficult over time, and we talked to her about maybe having him go to a day program one day a week, and she was very reluctant to do that because she wanted to be the person who gave him all his care. But she agreed to it, and it was actually a very good thing. It worked well for him. He was more stimulated at the day program. We added another day a week, and over time, soon he was going frequently, but then he started to develop some bed sores, and his dementia progressed. And she had promised him that she would never put him in a nursing home. But in our discussions with her, it came to be evident that he actually needed the 24-hour, skilled care of a nursing home. And so she eventually did put him in the nursing home, visited him all the time, and his bed sores healed, and he did pretty well for a while. And at the end of the day, for her, she left the experience after he passed away feeling like she had done one of the most meaningful things in her life. So that's Karen. I guess I want to talk a moment about forgiveness. So some people don't have quite that positive relationship with their care receiver. So sometimes the person that we're taking care of had been an alcoholic his whole life, or was abusive, or was a neglectful mother, or let's say we were never close. That's a really hard caregiving situation. So then we're dedicating ourselves to someone who maybe wasn't capable of dedicating themselves to us when we needed them. So that's tricky. So we like to talk about forgiveness. And I'm not a real believer that you can forgive and forget. But I think what you can do is let go and move on and remember that what happened in the past isn't happening now. And the idea is to reduce the intensity of the negative feelings, those old negative feelings that can come up in the caregiving situation, and to increase, one of the things we work on is increasing empathy and compassion for the care receiver, even if they'd been an alcoholic their whole life, or neglectful or abusive. And we try to help people set boundaries on what happened in the past and what is happening here and now, because it's different. And of course, we try to have people forgive themselves for whatever it is that they feel or whatever they did in the past. So another person that we've worked with, we'll call her Gloria. She had a mother who was tremendously neglectful. When she was growing up, her father left them when she was a year old. Her mother did remarry. She was completely attached to her stepfather, but unfortunately he passed away when she was a teenager. And after that, you know, she'd come home from school and her mother would be laying on the couch. The door would close and her mother wouldn't look up, wouldn't say hello, wouldn't say how was school. And Gloria got used to feeling like her mother, you know, wasn't that able to care for her. Well, many, many years later, now Gloria is a nurse and her mother is in renal failure. And Gloria very much spent her life wanting to get her mother's approval and love. And she thought this would be a great opportunity to try to do that. Which it isn't a great opportunity to do that, but it is a great opportunity because what Gloria was able to do was shift her relationship with her mother from the needy, longing child, never getting her love that she needed, to adult, professional nurse, daughter, doing the right thing. And she'd go into her mother's bedroom and she would say, "How are you feeling today?" And her mother might say, "Lousy." And she would say, "Well, tell me what's going on because we have a doctor's appointment." And so Gloria found a way to meet with her mother relationally that was much more mature than she had for most of her life. Instead of longing for a kind of love, she was able to be compassionate with her mother and empathic and recognize that not only had her mother had a difficult life full of depression, but now her mother was diminished. She was weak. She was ill, and Gloria could be her caregiver. She didn't have to just be the needy daughter. And so she was really able to work on that relationship. And as a matter of fact, it allowed her mother to sort of rise to the occasion as well and begin to truly appreciate Gloria for the abilities that she had. And their relationship really became, probably for the couple years that she cared for her mother, it was the best time of their relationship. Best relationship they had in their life. And after her mother passed away, Gloria came back and told us that she was absolutely grateful for that time with her mother, that it really transformed her relationship, and it was extremely meaningful. So basically, we want to get the idea across that caregiving certainly brings strains, and we don't have to explain those, but it can bring gains. And sometimes those gains are really life-altering and extremely meaningful. So we do our best to help people make the most of their situation and find what's positive and transformative in it.
So I'm hoping that we have a little time for questions and conversation. So we kind of gave you a kind of the whirlwind tour of some of the work that we do. What are your thoughts or questions about anything we said tonight? I'm sorry, Brenda, let me get you. Good. What a great idea, Julie.
I appreciate so much what you're saying.
Brenda, why don't you introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah, my name's Brenda, and I work for Unity Hospice. And certainly when you're in hospice, you get, you're a little bit more educated, and that makes the journey easier because you know kind of the direction you're going. But I appreciate so much, we talked a little bit earlier, because that's the situation I found myself in, was that when you can look at it instead of running from it, because wherever you're at, it's inevitable. You know, there's not a way you can change it. You know, when you have the ability then to kind of plant your feet and you look at it, you may end up finding that person and developing a better relationship with them, as I did with my father. You know, I was telling, I think you earlier, that is, I actually developed a relationship with my father I never had in the same situation. And it takes a mind shift, it does. And it doesn't mean things aren't going to be scary, they're not going to be hard, you know. And I really appreciate that so much, because that's true and that's real.
Thank you for saying that, Brenda. I'll just say personally, my mother is failing. And in terms of end-of-life care planning, you know, we got the living will, we got her funeral wishes, we got all that straight away. I mean, that, in some ways, those are the basics. But in terms of my kind of coming to terms with her dying and the relationship I've had with her, you know, she and I still have some emotional work to do. I have some emotional work to do to try to take some of what's up on these slides here and apply it in my own life. Because I haven't always had the best relationship with my mother, and it's hard. And I don't want my mother to die before we kind of find some way of I wouldn't say fully reconciling, but just having a little bit of closure on our relationship in a way that we don't quite have as yet. So, and if you could please introduce yourself.
So I'm June McCoy. I'm an academic geriatrician here at Northwestern. And I really, I rushed to get over here, got here a little bit late, but I felt it was important. The interesting thing is everything you say is really true, because I was in a clinic with a gentleman, my patient is like 95, and he feels, we're talking about, his granddaughter comes with him, and we're talking, he's saying, well, I guess I won't be here much longer. And I said to him, and it goes to the point you made that you think it's the sprint, the 2 years, but it could be 9 years. And I said to him, well, you know, you could live to be 105. And he says, how could that happen? I said, because I have a patient I'm taking care of now who's 105 and doing really well. And I saw his granddaughter, who loves him dearly, roll her eyes, because they have this kind of love-fight relationship. And she said to me, Dr. McCoy, you know, I haven't been to a doctor in a long time, and I'm not taking care of myself. And I told her, you have to, in front of him. But the point I'm making is that you underscore the things that I see every single week in my clinic. Caregivers struggling, patients believing that their time is coming. That gentleman is going to live a long time, I'm pretty sure. So I need to really reinforce to her what you said. It's a marathon. Take it easy, take a break, get some help. Always there's one person on whom everything falls. So this is very timely. I can't wait to see the book. I can't wait to buy the book. And I'm thinking, while I'm sitting here, all the people to whom I can give that book.
Just one
so
copy
thank
of
you
the book?
so much. I will buy more than one copy. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jeanette. I'm a recently widowed caregiver and an academic. I wonder if you could reflect on the relationship between caregiving and grief, just kind of in the sense of as what happens with our loved one progresses, it seems like there's an element of grief occurring along the way, that it's not like the stage of caregiving and then loss. And so I just wonder, with your experience, what you see as that relationship.
We absolutely do. We definitely. As a matter of fact, one of the things that makes caregiving so difficult is that the caregiver not only is providing care, but they are watching their loved one get more and more diminished, and they know what's coming. And so the caregiver's grieving, and it's not like you can just grieve right in front of your loved one all the time, so you're containing your feelings, and your time is going by. It's so hard. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think it's a topic that people don't think about enough. The grief is occurring probably from diagnosis on. And so it's very hard to grieve while you're caregiving. And then afterward, grief is so complicated. For many people, it's, just horrible, painful grief. And then, sometimes there's a feeling of relief. Not because you want the person to be gone, but because the caregiving was so strenuous and so painful. And then there's guilt about the relief. There's so many feelings. And, what we try to do is just help people accept whatever they're feeling and process it. And while caregiving, sometimes we recommend, that people get support, that they go to a caregiver support group or go to counseling, because then they can talk about that grief, not in front of their care receiver. But super important topic.
So I want to just pick up and underscore some of the things that Julie said. So we talk about anticipatory grief. I mean, we're seeing the loved one declining, and that is a loss, and we're responding to that, but we're also anticipating the ultimate loss. And then what we say is usually the grief period, the period of intense bereavement is going to be 1 to 2 years after the death. And most people greatly underestimate how long that's going to take. But 1 to 2 years, in our opinion, is not out of the realm of possibilities. It's actually quite likely. In our area in Philadelphia, we see some hospice programs which will continue with some level of service for families for up to a year after the death of a loved one. If nothing else, just sending kind of letters saying at 3 months, this is what you could expect in the way of grief. At 6 months after the death, this is what you can expect in the way of grief. Just to kind of remind them that people are still thinking of them. And then in our psychotherapy practices, we typically will continue with caregivers for a year after their loved one dies, helping them make the adjustment to...
Or longer.
Yeah, so or longer. And so some of it is they're grieving the loss of the person that they love, but they are also grieving a loss of a role that may have been very meaningful to them. And then how do they shift into other roles in life that may not have the same high stakes? And so how are they going to find something that matters to them? And sometimes we see people who were caregivers in one situation where someone died, and then afterwards they find another caregiving situation which they can continue what has been very meaningful work, or they volunteer in the hospital, or they do something to try to continue caring. So Jeanette, is any of what we're talking about, does any of it square with your experience?
Well, absolutely. I think it resonates. I think the part about participatory grief of what was to come, but also grieving things along the way, of seeing decline where you hope to see improvement or those things. So the object of grief, at least for me, really transformed over time too, during the journey.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jeanette. I had a question for an organization that talks about planning ahead for end-of-life care, and I know a lot of us are probably future caregivers. Is there any value with the rest of your family of planning ahead for future caregiving and how that would go with siblings, cousins, whatever?
Absolutely. Okay, so this is a really kind of complicated topic. I'll try to be brief. So if you have parents who are aging, you should not be waiting until their parents are falling down and breaking
Something
bones
bad happens.
before you start having conversations with them about maybe moving out of the family home. Maybe it's not a good idea to live in a 3-story family home anymore. They should be living in a 1-floor living environment. But there should be ongoing conversations about how the adult children can step up and begin helping out in various ways. So that's a conversation between the adult children and the parents. But research suggests that the parents themselves have ideas of how they want to be cared for later in life. And they also oftentimes have an idea of which child they want to do the primary caregiving if they need care. And sometimes the adult children come to the same conclusion that yes, that one sibling is going to be the one who's going to be the primary caregiver, and sometimes not. And so a lot of this is grist for the mill. There ought to be some ongoing conversation, and that there ought to be, as much as possible, negotiation about how things are going to get done. We all want our loved ones to live as well as they can for as long as they can. If it means caring for an aging adult, it means helping them remain as independent and safe as possible for as long as is possible. And so there are lots of different ways of reaching those goals, but that it just requires ongoing conversation, not waiting for an emergency for the family to be thrust into a situation where they have to make snap judgments, which are oftentimes not the best judgments.
Of course, it's true that many people don't want to talk about that, and the aging parents really don't want to talk about it a lot of times. So it's hard to get that going.
We're going to take one more question here, and then we'll move it out and have more questions.
I don't really have a question, and I'm looking forward to the glass of wine, so I'll try to keep it brief. My name is Tula. I lead a caregiving coalition that I founded in Northeast Florida. I've worked with hundreds of caregivers over the years. My background is medical social work, and I am the primary caregiver for both of my parents who are both failing, and it's like I want to comment on everything here. To her, I want to say, you're the clinician seeing the patient, reach back and see the family caregiver as a patient as well, because they are suffering, and 30 to 40% of caregivers die before the patient or the loved one that they're taking care of. I work for a hospice organization, and I founded this caregiver coalition. So on anticipatory grief, I get it. I'm watching my parents lose so much. I'm watching them My father's lost his home. He's not living in the same institution that my mother's living in. That's horrible. My dad's in an assisted living, my mother's in a nursing home. Grief at all the losses, grief at all the function that they are both losing. Anticipatory grief is real for my father, it's real for me. And most hospices offer support. I do work for a hospice. They offer support during the dying process. They see the family and the patient as one unit, and they support the families as much as they support the patient. So if you've got a loved one who's nearing end of life, by all means, access your local community nonprofit hospice, might I add, because there is a difference in services. And most hospices do offer bereavement counseling, one-on-one and or groups, for at least a year after the loss of the loved one, at least a year. You've gone through the first birthday, the first Christmas, the first anniversary, and they will help you through all of that. Planning for caregiving. I've been a medical social worker since 1979, and now I'm in different roles, but for years I tried to get my father to talk about this part of his life. Wasn't going to do it. If you didn't talk about it, it wasn't going to happen.
Well, I think a lot of people often feel like that, and they definitely put it off. I really appreciate your comment about including the caregiver as a patient.
They
are we
are.
wrapping up now? Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, this side of the room has been pretty silent. Maybe we lost you somewhere along the way, perhaps. I don't know.
Okay, my name is Ed, but I was just thinking, we were talking, I think the groups, caregiver groups are self-selective, and I never realized that till now. I think we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. And I went to caregiving group yesterday, and 4 new people showed up, and I'm meeting a better class of people in the caregiving group. One of the gentlemen was talking about his wife and everything else, and another wife was talking about her husband, and he looked across and says, "Isn't your husband a federal judge?" She said, "Yes." So, as I say, I've gained a lot, and I've never thought about the gains I've made in going to the caregiving groups and getting the help I've gotten.
That's wonderful.
Thank you, Ed. So I'll just say briefly, caregiver support groups are not for everyone, but for those who go, they're really wonderful. The Alzheimer's Association has been a big supporter of caregiver support groups for many, many years. Many hospitals have caregiver support groups. Unfortunately, they're often underutilized because sometimes caregivers feel stigmatized with this idea that they quote-unquote need support. Sometimes it's better to have an education group or some other gathering of people in this work. But for those who go and get invested in the group and develop relationships with the other group members, it's extremely gratifying because not only are you gaining from them, but you're also giving to them, and you're all supporting one another through some very difficult life passages. So with that as our conclusion, I'm going to hand this back to Mary. Sorry.
So thank you, everybody. Please, let's give a big hand to the speakers. Thank you. So we'll be out. Please join us for a reception in the lobby. There's some appetizers and desserts and coffee and wine and beer, and stick around. Oh, and please fill out your evaluation, and we'll have raffle tickets for you when you hand them back in. Thank you, Kathleen.